Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of thecinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film, and this year's podcast media partner for the dCFF24 2024 Film Festival. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today I'm so excited because we're going to be talking with the director of one of this year's most exciting genre films playing at the festival on a topic near and dear to my heart, being the time travel. The film is Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's Paradox. We're going to kick things off by talking with the film's writer-director Stimson Snead about the film's approach to the time travel genre. We'll also cover how he adapted the original short film as a feature here. And then we'll close out the show by learning more about when you can watch Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's Paradox at this year's festival and also beyond. Now, I want to quickly note that before we get into today's conversation, if you enjoy listening to the show, you're catching these dCFF interviews and you say, hey, this is good stuff, or hey, I'm learning about new films, please support this podcast by subscribing and leaving us a rating and a review on your preferred podcast app, especially if you're wanting to have these interviews dropped right in your RSS feed, right in your listening ears, the day they come out so you can still catch the films at the festival. Subscribing is the best way to do that. But without further ado, let's get to today's film, Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's Paradox.
Let's get right into it. Dr. Tim Travers, tell us exactly what the Time Traveler's Paradox is. First, a scientist makes a time machine that loops back exactly 1 minute into the past. Then the scientist kills his younger self. Now you have a man who should not, cannot exist, yet somehow does.
With full love and respect, I hope you die a very painful death.
According to a short description from the dCenter website, Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's Paradox is described as, it's called the Time Traveler's Paradox, in which a scientist creates a time machine and kills his younger self. So now a man who should not and cannot exist somehow does. And this is the paradox, and paradoxes are impossible, and the man who has created it is Tim Travers, a reclusive mad scientist whose stated mission in life is to stand alone with God at the end of time and tell the bastard off. Man, what a wind up. I'm so excited to be joined by the film's writer and director, Stimson Snead. Stimson, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Nice to meet you.
You know, I don't want to waste a moment here because I could talk time travel for hours, and before we get to the fun stuff, I do have to ask, this is started as a short film, as I understand. I have not seen the short film, although I have seen the feature. Maybe you could tell me a little bit more about the story of adapting the original short and expanding it into a feature film. Like, what was that process like? When did you decide, hey, I really need to flesh out this idea?
Well, the thing that made us turn the short into a feature was kind of by accident. I had been gearing up to prep a completely different film, and at the last second, the funding fell through. And so I was stuck. We had shooting dates, we had crew, we had some cast people, we had some money still left over. The only thing we were lacking was a movie to film. And so I looked back at the work I'd done over the last couple of years, and my favorite project was this short film called Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's Paradox, which I had done with all the same people and the same team. And I realized that because Tim had done so well on the festival circuit, that this was as close to a market testing as I was ever going to get. So the short was never made as a proof of concept. It was never made with any intention except to serve its own purposes, to tell its own quirky little story, and then I would be done with it forever. So I was as surprised as anyone when I decided, well, shit, let's make this into a feature. And because we were trying to squeeze it into that existing production window of the other project, from the time myself and lead actor Samuel Dunning made the decision to do this movie to when we rolled camera with no script was 90 days.
Holy cow.
So, yeah, we had a working version of the draft together in less than 30 days that we started our development and pre-production on, with me tweaking stuff in the script right up into the day we rolled camera. It was freaking insane.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm curious, did having the short film as sort of a jumping off point or a framework, did that make the writing easier or faster, or was it actually more challenging?
It made the writing easier and faster because we all loved the short, especially myself and Sam, but the short really told us what we liked about the character. It also kind of told us what we didn't like about it. And it made us realize what we wanted to do when we turned it in this larger project. Like, for example, In the short film, the whole joke of the story is that Tim Travers has absolutely no character arc, which is really funny to do a story about someone who belligerently refuses to change, because that is flies in the face of every writing convention you're supposed to do. Stories are about change. And so the first thing we had to change in turning into a feature is figure out what his character arc would be. Uh, but having that jumping off point really helped. And weirdly enough, almost every word of the original script for the short film is in the feature. So the feature was very much us taking this truncated little story and then letting it expand out. There is stuff hinted to and alluded to in the short film. We hint to him having stolen plutonium in the short film, but that actually becomes a major plot point in the feature, as well as allowing me to make a nod to the great of greats, Back to the Future. There is a draft, which I did not use this line, but there is a draft where at one point we do refer to it as being stolen from the Libyans. We changed that. I stand by that.
Good call. Yeah, great. No, probably a good call in the year of our Lord 2024. But you mentioned Back to the Future. Obviously, that's like got to be one of the most classic time travel films, or at least the most popular time travel films ever made. Were there any other inspirations that you were looking to whenever you were trying to flesh out Tim Travers?
No, actually. Like, we were actually in the writing process. So this goes all the way back to the short film and why I wanted to make it in the first place. I get really excited for real science and for stories about characters who are as interested in the science as I am. And every time travel film I've ever seen, the good ones and the terrible ones, time travel is almost always a plot contrivance. In Back to the Future, it's not a story about time travel. It's a story about getting to meet your parents when they were teens. And that's the comedy. The time travel is just the only way to make it where you can meet your parents as teens. And as far as I know, there's not really any time travel movies that do make the time travel itself and how it works, how it doesn't work, what the consequences of time travel would be on not just a philosophical level, but a literal, practical, what's happening right now level. I haven't seen that. And that's what I wanted to do with the short. The short was actually born of me watching a time travel film and hating it. It was an independent film, which I won't name because if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. But where the characters were not behaving in ways that were rational. Like, they've invented time travel, but they're worried about their personal problems. Put your personal problems on hold. You are a god. And so Tim was written to be a character who would react the way I would react.
Yeah, I love that. So you're able to sort of put a little bit of yourself into the story and into the character and really just try to play out. If I was caught in a time travel scenario, how would this shape up? Is that right?
Yeah, there is so much of me in the lead character that I actually wrote Tim Travers with the intention of playing the role myself. And then I quickly came to my senses and realized there was no chance in hell I could play it myself. And I met Sam, and Sam is amazing. So that's how that happened.
Speaking of, what was it like to really feature multiple Samuel Dunnings in one scene? There's several scenes where it's literally dozens of them, it seems.
It's not as hard as it sounds. It's actually one of those things where the act of doing it is very straightforward. The act of sitting through doing it is time consuming and exhausting, and you have to keep track of 50 million little details. It is one of those things where it's very straightforward to plan for. It is not at all straightforward to execute. You got to keep track of who is who, because each Tim, and there's 30 of them in the script, are considered individual characters. It's 30 different performances that Sam is keeping track of. And because we're shooting so fast, sometimes you would literally be stopping mid-take and being like, wait, am I the mean one or the stupid one? And I'd be like, you're the stupid one. Okay, got it.
That's incredible. 30 different versions of the same character. Holy cow.
And he had to keep track of all of them. Thankfully, he was surrounded by a really good first AD, Cheyenne Smith, and a really good script supervisor, Justin, who was always keeping him and me on the ball about where we needed to be.
I mean, and Benedict Cumberbatch probably thought he had it bad when he had to play a couple different versions of himself in Multiverse of Madness. But
he never had more than two of him on screen at a time.
Never. No, it was really ambitious. And I thought largely, I mean, you guys pulled it off. The character having chemistry with himself. It was a total hoot to watch on the screen. Now, thinking about multiverses, though, I mean, you have there's a bit of an ongoing conversation I'm picking up on throughout the film. How did the popularity of multiverses influence the ideas in Tim Travers, if at all? Honestly, it sounds like you might have just ran with it.
Uh, Honestly, that was just convenient timing. Like, I have kind of hated multiverses for years. To me, multiverses are what you do when you don't have any ideas left, writing wise. And the reason we see multiverses so often in comics, especially, is because multiverses are the inevitable conclusion of stories that don't have the guts to end. And to me, a good story is not a story without an ending. So if you have to keep going forever, if you have to keep upping the stakes, inevitably everything's going to become a multiverse. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, but what those exceptions usually have in common, things like Everything Everywhere All at Once, is that they weren't made to be an ongoing thing. It was a single standalone story exploring one specific take on it. So I have really kind of hated multiverses for a long time. So it was really shockingly convenient that right at the time we made the film, multiverses suddenly became the big thing in Hollywood. Like, everybody was talking about them. And that was not planned on our part. We were not reacting to that. That was just, sometimes God loves you.
You get the fingers on the pulse. You get the fingers on the pulse, Stimson. You're ready to roll. Well, I mean, another thing sort of related here, and I'm digging into the influences here because I'm picking up when I'm watching the movie a lot of ideas. I'm like, I recognize this and that. You have multiverses. You also had the Alex Jones inspired radio host played by Joel McHale. I mean, the film really does seem like it's taking in, or at least is loosely influenced by the always online world that we're currently living in. I mean, were these conscious inspirations, or was it more like just for the jokes?
Some of it was conscious. It wasn't really about the online world we live in, but in my own writing, I like to do stories that dig into the conversation going on. And as a rule of thumb for me, that I find things that usually if you're talking about the conversation, if you want to be engaged in the zeitgeist, it is very this self-serious, self-important, and that's just not how I write. I stand by it's an unrealistic way to write. Real people dealing with real problems have a sense of humor. Real people laugh about the things that make them angry as a coping mechanism. And so I find humor is a better way to engage with the ideas that I find interesting. Alex Jones is a perfect example because we're never going to get rid of him. And when he goes away, there will be 50 million replacements of him. This is just a part of the modern world that isn't going away. And rather than make like a big shake my fist at the sky thing about it, I would rather just have a character like that we can all laugh at.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of takes a little bit of the power away, right?
It takes the power away, but it also lets it be human. One of the reasons I was really happy to cast McHale in that role is it's kind of impossible to hate Joel McHale, even if he's playing an awful human being. In fact, that's kind of his specialty as a role, is being lovable as awful people. And I think he brings a lot to that role because for as much as we want to mock this character, you still empathize with him a little bit because, Tim Travers is worse.
Absolutely. I mean, Tim Travers, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a lot of narcissism I'm picking up both textually and subtextually throughout the film. And the way you realize it visually and in situational humor was quite impressive. Got a lot of laughs out of me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a story about a man who goes back in time 1 minute to kill his younger self and then tries to figure out what that means. But if you want to get into the subtext, I mean, it's literally a story in which we are depicting for the first third repeated acts of self-harm. And without going into plot spoilers too much, it is a story about a man who goes from repeated acts of self-harm to learning to love himself. And that to me is a very compelling arc to take. And it's more fun to do that with someone who's awful. One of the things you often see in writing is you'll have these really fundamentally nice people who hate themselves and they have to learn to love themselves. But that's an easy arc when it's a fundamentally nice, good person. I think it's more compelling to ask, how does someone who is kind of awful, and Tim Travers is awful. He's not the worst character in it. We meet some worse characters in it, but he is one of the worst. And getting a guy like that to a point where he can accept himself as who he is, that's compelling to me. That's interesting.
Well, I thought you using Felicia Day as sort of a foil to him to help us realize both what is both terrible and lovable about that guy. Speaking of Felicia Day, I mean, she's one of the film's stars and also, executive producer. How did the two of you connect, and how would you describe that collaboration?
The connecting part was straightforward. I went through a casting director. I pitched the script to her. She really liked it. We cast her. And when we cast her, we also decided to bring her in as an executive producer because it's a project she was passionate about. And it's one she's been aggressively advocating for ever since. Felicia has been a godsend from day one and just an extremely easy person to work with. Like this, getting Felicia Day is a boring story. Showed her the script. She liked it. That was about it.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, in terms of the way that she represents the character on screen, though, like I was saying, I think she's a nice foil because, when you pair her with Tim Travers, you really kind of get to dig into what's going on in his psychology much more than hers.
Oh, absolutely. All the characters tend to reflect stuff back at Tim. Felicia's character is Delilah. Her role in the story is to be someone who is fundamentally unimpressed by him. Tim Travers, as a character, tends to have the whole world revolve around him. He is the center of his universe. He is the center of the whole universe in some more ways than one. And a lot of the supporting characters reinforce that worldview. When you have hitmen and killers, these are people still focused exclusively on him. When he's being interviewed by Joel McHale's Boonratty character, the focus is exclusively on Tim. The joy of Delilah as a character is her world does not revolve around him at all. She has a complex internal life. She's got her own motivation. She is her own, also kind of an awful human being in a lot of ways. But in no way, shape, or form does the plot or her character revolve around Tim. And I like that as a character because I think the story needs that. And also it allows me to make the polar opposite of the manic pixie trope. And that's also one of the joys of casting Felicia, as she has had to play that character before.
You also had the opportunity to work with a couple of Hollywood's most beloved character actors. I mean, I'm thinking mostly about Danny Trejo, Keith David. Tell me about that collaboration. Was that also through like a casting agent? How did you go about pitching them for the role?
Always through a casting director. We worked with Ronnie Yeskel, who was also the casting director on Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs. So she is an old Hollywood standard and a great person to work with, and also someone who lends a lot of credibility to the project. In both their cases, it was just showing them the script, getting them on board. Danny is, everything you've heard is true. He is one of the sweetest, nicest human beings you've ever met. We only had him on set for 2 days, and they were two of the more fun, crazy days we had because his character is in a lot of the weirdest scenes of the movie. And Danny just walks in as the guy who's seen everything like, oh, cool time machine, bro. I mean, he's walking around, he's talking to his girlfriend on his phone, they're Skyping, he's giving her a tour of the set via the Skype. Just a wonderful, sweet, kind man to work with. And he brings a sensitivity to his characters. I mean, people think of Danny Trejo as an action guy, but what they overlook is the reason he works so well as an action guy is because of the gentleness and sensitivity that is his actual person showing through. It makes you empathize with his characters in all of these roles he's had over the years. And it was thrilling to get to have him on this. Although I am very pleased that we do some things with his character that I don't think a lot of audience members are expecting.
I certainly wasn't expecting. I'll put it that way. Lots of surprises. Keith David, what was that, like one day of the shoot?
1 day of the shoot, but it was a big, big day of the shoot. And because of the scene he's in, Keith is the character who I can say very little about what he does in this movie, except to say that it is probably the best scene of the film. And it is certainly the funniest scene of the film. Keith David was...
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Keith David is someone who, just because of his reputation and his voice, he brings a gravitas to a character. And more than any other character in the film, who Keith David plays needs weight and gravitas. He needs to be somewhere where you walk into the room and when they speak, you stop speaking. It was funny. He's actually very soft-spoken in person. When he got to set, I gave him this tour through set. We were on our lunch break at the time because we were shooting with him in the afternoon. So we had this nice walk around set, introducing with folks, shaking hands, just the picture of a gentleman every step of the way. Once we get onto the set, when it's like, all right, roll camera, you could almost see him flipping a switch in his head, going into acting mode, opening his mouth, and the walls of the building shook.
Incredible.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think it was such a treat to see him pop up. Listeners, you're going to have to catch this film at the dCFF Film Festival to find out the secrets. But trust me, there's some good surprises in there, great jokes. I wouldn't dare to spoil it, but also I would be hard-pressed to describe exactly what it is that happens, which is the beautiful part about Tim Travers. For audiences who haven't watched the film yet, once the credits roll, film's over, what do you hope they take away from Tim Travers?
I hope, first and most importantly, I just hope people had fun. I am very much of the school of thought that says intelligent storytelling and fun storytelling are not mutually exclusive. So first and foremost, I just hope they had a good time, because when an audience sits down and watches a film, it's a gift. They are giving you 1 to 2 hours of their life. And at the very least you can do as an artist is make sure that that was 2 hours well spent. So first and foremost, I just want folks to have a good time. Secondly, and almost as importantly, I hope they're thinking about themselves. Tim Travers is the story of a narcissist who hates himself and learns to love himself. And part of the reason he is such a terrible character is to send that message that a terrible person is still worthy of love and can still make themselves better. And I'm hoping everyone in the audience is thinking about themselves at the end and thinking about the ways they should treat themselves and how they can be nicer to themselves. And I swear to God, when you watch the film, we're not browbeating you with it nearly as much as I am now. But these are the themes I'm hoping you're carrying away. In the film itself, we do not browbeat you with these morals. I would like to stress that.
No, I actually think the ideas are extremely well communicated in very clever ways. Again, it's like, you're not beating me over the head with it, but I'm like, I'm picking up what you're putting down too. It's a great storytelling, I would say. We're going to start wrapping up here in a second. And one question I've been asking all of our guests as part of this year's dCFF Film Festival coverage is film going memories, film going experience. Stimson, what would you say is your favorite film going memory or experience?
I'll give 2 answers. My most indie answer is watching The Raid Part 2 at a little theater in Los Angeles called Cinefamily. Small theater, but all the kind of audience members who go wild for this sort of thing. There is nothing like an enthusiastic audience who is there loving each other, loving the film, and everybody is on the same page. It's such a great experience. But that isn't my favorite experience. Because you can get that experience at film festivals, you can get it with certain indie niche crowds, but something magical has to happen when that happens to a mainstream audience, let alone a wide mainstream audience. All right, I'm going to have to give up my indie snobby filmmaker card here, but my favorite audience reaction is watching the audience at the end of Infinity War.
Ooh, that's a great answer.
Because that film, and say what you want against everything happening in Marvel right now, but for 15 years, they built up a collective love across the entire world, and I doubt any of us will ever see such a worldwide collective reaction of shock and joy like happened at the end of both those movies ever again. That, I would argue, is a true once-in-a-generation event.
I think that's doubly true when you consider just how much more fragmented we are with our media habits than we used to be. So again, legendary, like you said, 15 years of build up and then a cliffhanger. And then a year later, the payoff. Incredible. Great responses. Well, Stimson, I have to ask, the film is going to be playing here in Oklahoma City, downtown Oklahoma City, as part of the dCFF Film Festival on Friday, June 7th at 9:30 p.m. at the Harkins Bricktown in Auditorium 10, with a follow-up encore screening on Sunday, June 9th at 12 p.m. at the Rodeo Cinema Film Row.
And I'm going to be there for both. So feel free to walk up, tell me you love it, or, slap me really hard and say, what have you done with your life?
Well, I don't want to slap too hard. I'm in fear of fleshy explosions. All right. Well, hey, Stimson, thanks so much for talking with me today. Where can people keep up with both you and also, Tim Travers, of course, dCFF, but also beyond dCFF?
Well, that same weekend, if you're not fortunate enough to be at dCFF, we are also going to be playing at Lighthouse Film Festival in New Jersey. So any of you East Coasters in the Northeast have a chance to go see it there. And lead actor Samuel Dunning will be there. And then all of you out in Los Angeles area, we are going to be having our LA premiere at Dances with Films on June 25th at the Chinese theaters. So you can follow us there. But the best way to follow us is just on our social media. Our Instagram is very full of details, and it also will take you straight to a link tree, which also includes reviews and places you can buy tickets for all of our currently announced upcoming screenings.
Awesome. Well, hey, Stimson Snead, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on the Cinematic Schematic today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure being here.
And listeners, I want to reiterate one last time. Again, I know I'm biased for the sci-fi time travel, but if you go see this movie, you absolutely won't regret it. It's going to make you laugh. It might make you laugh until you cry. And it's going to make you think a lot. I've been thinking about it ever since I caught the film.
Whether you want to or not.
Yeah. Now, for all of the things dCenter, you can head on over to deadcenterfilm.org, and I hope you'll consider supporting the festival by purchasing a badge or individual ticket for the more than 160 films that are playing. Again, if you're listening to this is Friday, so last time. This film, Tim Travers is playing tonight at 9:30 p.m. at Harkins Bricktown Auditorium 10 with an encore on Sunday. Don't miss it. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you again next time.